Welcome to the Stormsurf video surf forecast for the week starting Sunday, May 14th. Looking at significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean, we don't see a whole lot going on. In fact, if you follow the bright colors left to right, pretty much a zonal flow is indicated. That is the jet stream. One can surmise just by looking at the wave model charts that it's pretty much just running flat from the west to the east with no troughs embedded in it. We have one small area seas, 26 feet here under New Zealand, and barely 30-foot seas in the far southeast Pacific, but just nothing looking particularly interesting at this moment in time. Let's get into the details. As usual, we'll start our tour looking off at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales, and when those gales do form, help direct their path. We're looking for a trough, that is, something in the southern branch of the jet pushing to the north, and we really don't see that. So here's the southern branch running generally down around 60 south. That's called a zonal flow when it runs pretty much just on a straight line across the Pacific. And then the northern branch of the jet pretty much doing the same thing at about 25 south, but the two jets do join, the two branches of the jet join here, sort of. I mean, there's still split, but some merging energy, but still, if that's right there, that's the closest to a trough we see just off of very southern Chile, and just nothing particularly interesting. Let's roll this out, and as you can see, more of the same. There's a bit of a trough forecast to develop Monday night into Tuesday off of extreme southern Chile. Some decent winds blowing up or pushing up into it, but it kind of pinches off. Probably not a whole lot of support for gale development. Another trough develops Wednesday night under New Zealand. This is kind of pinched also. It was actually looking better a day or two ago. Not quite as healthy now. But then it gets some additional energy pulling in on Friday. What is that? 130 knot winds. And there you go. That looks like a pretty decent trough right there. Probably supportive of gale development into Saturday, and that continues into Sunday. And there's the end of the model. While ridge pushes down, again, split jet stream pattern, high pressure in between the two. So that pretty much says whatever activity is going to happen, it looks like it's going to be confined to later in the work week and in the West Pacific, which is actually pretty good for California. Next, we take a look down at the surface. Surface level pressure, surface level winds, and as expected, yep, there's a little bit of a gale here. Gale, 35 knot winds under New Zealand, getting some traction on the ocean surface. Another broad area, 30 to 35 knot winds, pretty much targeting Chile. But again, the zonal flow, the jet stream is just driving everything from west to east. We really want a trough. We really want to get some wind energy pushing more to the northeast. That's what actually gets swell into Hawaii and into the U.S. West Coast. So there, remember, we saw a little bit of trough Tuesday off of Chile, little area, 45 knot winds, but that fades out. Another system on Tuesday night, little patch of 45, almost 50 knot winds, but again, just running pretty much to the east, looking a little better come Wednesday night. And then also this broader system starting to develop. Remember, we saw a real trough here off of New Zealand on Thursday. Broad area of fetch here in the 30, 35, pockets of 40, but not particularly cohesive. There's even a little pocket of 50 knot winds on Friday, getting much more interesting come later Friday. Broad area, 45 knot winds. Also notice aim pretty well to the northeast, and continuing, looking solid into Saturday, and then into Sunday, fading out. And still, yet more energy into midday Sunday. This is the 06Z run of the model. Next up, we take a look at the wave model chart. Now, this is the 12Z run, so it's a little bit fresher, and you'll see why I'm highlighting this in a minute. As we saw before, 26-foot seas under New Zealand, another patch at 28, and it says 30 foot, and we'll give it 29 feet off of Chile. But none of those really do anything. We'll just roll this out. Remember, we saw a little tiny fetch midweek here in the Central Pacific it was almost 50 knot winds, but not a whole lot happens with that. And it's when we get into Thursday, then we see activity under New Zealand in the big trough there, 30-foot seas. Now here, there's something strange you're going to see here. Now, what this suggests is the 12Z run of the model is not as strong as the 06Z run. Seas are only, so that means surface winds probably weren't as high as what we just saw, and things still, good enough to generate surf, but not nearly as intense as what we saw before. And you see it still continued 28, 30-foot seas. Now here, this is like an old frame from the previous run of the model. Somehow it still got concatenated in this run. And you saw with the larger wind, or broader winds, higher seas, of course, 43 foot. We've actually seen one run of the model had this up to in the 50-foot range, but then it's back to the current run of the model and down some. So the short story here is that something's going to happen under New Zealand from one run of the model to the next. I mean, literally in a 6-hour difference, it went from being 43-foot seas down to maybe 32 feet. So again, it's still 150 hours out. This thing will flop all over the place and change, but this is the area to watch under New Zealand starting Thursday, Friday, Saturday time frame. Might be perhaps the first real southern hemi swell of the season, or it might end up being just some, utility class swell, something to ride, but nothing more. Way too early to know. And then for fun, let's just go back the past week, see what has happened, see if there's any other swell in the water. We're looking for 30-foot seas, or at least 28-foot seas, which is this darker shade of red. We're already into Wednesday of last week. Here we go. We see something, what's that, 27-foot seas that was last Friday. And there we go, a little area, 32-foot seas on Saturday. Now, California cuts off. Southern California about 117 west, so it'd be right there. Northern California about 122. So this is in the swell window. But again, that zonal flow pushing all the winds, so they were pretty much west winds. Not a lot of energy aimed very well to the north, so maybe some small background swell we'll see from that, from like a 185-degree angle or something. Relative to California, Hawaii, we'll see nothing from that. And then this fetch here by the 6Z Sunday was pretty much out of the window, and oops, there we are. That's the current. So maybe one small pulse. So what that means, that pulse, we'll go back, take a look at this. Just eyeballing it roughly. There we go, right there. So that was Saturday, so it'd be about 7 days out till any energy hit up into California, or basically next weekend, maybe a small little pulse of activity. And then nothing until the next system, if it develops Thursday, Friday, Saturday under New Zealand, and that would be probably the better part of 8, 9, 10, probably 9 to 10 days before any of that reached California. So very kind of a quiet pattern for the southern hemi. Likewise, we'll take a look in the northern hemisphere. A small little low-pressure system is out here over in the West Pacific. Seas never even made it to 20 feet. No swell expected relative to Hawaii. They'd be the most likely recipient, just seeing how they're closer than the U.S. West Coast. We'll roll this out. There's been some hints of a gale developing in the Gulf, and as of Friday, it's suggesting, okay, this is actually almost the date line. Small area, 20-foot seas. Maybe some 18-foot seas, maybe some background energy for Hawaii, and then the models do that same sort of thing in the northern hemi that we saw before, over amplifying it. Oops, and there we go, we're done. So yeah, there's been some hints of something going on here in the Gulf, but suspect that's probably not going to happen. We're very late in the season. Maybe some wind swell relative to California. And of course, since we bring that up, let's look at the local picture. As of right now, we'll pull this into, say, 18Z Sunday. High pressure is over the Gulf of Alaska, 1036 millibar high. Air circulates clockwise around high pressure. Lower pressure, you see the red isobars there. Weak low pressure inland, heat low. Heat rate causes air to rise, generates lower pressure. You get a pressure gradient between the two. That is, when high pressure gets close to low pressure, it tightens up the isobars. The distance between each isobar is less. That means more wind, okay? And that's what's been driving this persistent northwest wind and therefore wind swell along the California coast. Also, east trades relative to Hawaii in the 20-knot range. Not right on the islands, but off there. But that's a good way to generate east wind swell. There has been east wind swell on east-facing shores. At least it's something to ride. Let's go see how this plays out. We get into, Monday. Winds are supposed to build to 25 knots off the Point Arena down to San Francisco area. Fetch continues east fetch relative to the Hawaiian Islands. Wind swell. Pretty much that pattern continues for Hawaii. Starts weakening come Wednesday. Also for the U.S. West Coast, winds die down. They're only in the 15 knot and then falling 15 knot range and falling south. And then the high pressure starts weakening. Notice fetch relative to Hawaii dies out. East wind swell fades. Same thing for California. But then relative to California, it tries to come back a little bit on Thursday. I mean, 20, little pocket of 25 knot winds. You get some 8-second, maybe 9-second period wind swell. And more on Friday. Now here's that low theoretically it's supposed to move into the Gulf. And I think this the 12Z run downgraded it, so this is overstated. If it actually did this, Hawaii for sure would get swell. So would the U.S. West Coast, but we don't really see that happen. And then as we get into a week out, pretty much even the wind swell dies. Going to be kind of quiet. So for both Hawaii, trades slack off, and northwest winds, which are effectively the trades for California, slack off too. So if you're going to go ride wind swell, do it now while you can. As we get into next weekend, even that's going to fade out. Long term, let's take a look at what's going on with the MJO and the El Nino Southern Oscillation. As usual, we'll start out looking at winds on the equator, specifically in what we call the Kelvin wave generation area, that area from 170 west. The date line's right here. We're on the equator, West Pacific here, East Pacific here. There's New Guinea. So from 170 west, 5 degrees north and south of the equator, over to about 135 east. When you see, and same thing right there. This is actual wind speeds from the TAO buoy array. We see trades in effect pretty much the whole way across the Pacific. Anomalies, differences from normal. For this time of year, we see pretty much what looks like a slack pattern. It just means the winds are pretty much about normal, maybe a hair bit stronger than normal here, right around 160 east, but out of the east, but basically a normal pattern. Then we look at the forecast. Kelvin wave generation area is pretty much between these two tick marks here. This is the whole planet. Blues are easterly anomalies. Reds are westerly anomalies. The active phase of the MJO, we've talked about this before, is when the active phase of the MJO is over the Kelvin wave generation area, it tends to suppress trades. That actually increases the odds for tropical development. Also feeds energy into the northern and sometimes the southern branch of the jet stream, and helps support storm formation, mainly in the Gulf of Alaska and eastern Pacific in winter months, but sometimes in summer months relative to the northern hemisphere. It also supports storm development in the southern hemisphere. Anyway, so what we've been through, I'll call it a bit of an active phase in the West Pacific here in late April, but then somewhere about 9th of May, you can see these blues. Easterly anomalies started developing. There's the Kelvin wave generation area right in there. And the forecast for the next week looks, at least for the first 5 or so days, strong easterly anomalies. That's suggestive of the inactive phase of the MJO. After looking at the wave models, we saw not a whole lot going on. This is pretty much the culprit. Inactive phase, taking control. Now, the good news is it looks like a week out, it's already supposed to be moving out of the Kelvin wave generation area. A little bit of it hanging on. But once it gets past about here, and you can just see the trend moving this way, then we'll be in the clear. And then basically, so the inactive phase of the MJO sort of suppresses storm development, just like the active phase enhances the potential for storm development. So we're kind of in a down period for a week here, according to this. Next, we look at outgoing long wave radiation. Basically, it's another way of saying where the clouds are, where the precipitation is, and where it isn't. Yellows and oranges are positive, meaning more sunlight reflectivity, meaning high pressure, meaning the inactive phase of the MJO. And this suggests it's right in the West Pacific. No big surprise. That's why we have the easterly anomalies we saw on the previous chart. And for the next week, it's supposed to stay there. But then about 2 weeks out, it fades out. The active phase of the MJO, the blues, that's negative anomalies, meaning more clouds less sunlight reflectivity, meaning rain, meaning the active phase of the MJO is pretty much bottled up in the Indian Ocean, moving to the maritime continent 2 weeks out. The GEFS model suggests, well, the inactive phase is maybe supposed to fade a little bit quicker than what the statistic model above suggests, but it also suggests the active phase of the MJO isn't really making any significant progress. So the two models, for the most part, are in sync. Phase diagram charts here. The heavy dot is where the active phase of the MJO is. You're looking down on, we'll call it the North Pole, basically, and the active phase moves from west to east, from the Indian Ocean to the maritime continent, over the West Pacific into the East Pacific, under the U.S. West Coast, across the Atlantic on the equator, north of Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. It does this cycle round and round and round. Currently, the active phase, no big surprise, in the western Indian Ocean, and if the dot is inside or near the circle, it's very weak. The further away it is, the stronger it is. So weak active phase in the western Indian Ocean, forecast to make it to the maritime continent 2 weeks out, per the ECMF model, but be very weak. The GEFS model basically says the same thing, a little bit of a variation, but no big deal. So all the models are appearing to be in pretty good correlation. Jet stream forecast, runs about 2 weeks ahead of normal down at the surface, but the reds and yellows suggest where the inactive phase of the MJO is. The green suggests enhanced precipitation or the active phase of the MJO. This suggests inactive phase is in control of the tropics in the, we'll call it the central Pacific, and is forecast to quickly move out of the Pacific by about the 24th of May. The active phase moves in, makes its trek across the Pacific here through, into about mid to early June or so, and then kind of a weak pattern and something that almost resembles an inactive phase, but not even that. It's just very weak kind of MJO pattern suggested by the time we get into mid to later June. And then, of course, our favorite model, the CEFS model, 850 millibar wind anomalies. So all these are different ways of looking at the MJO. You can look at wind anomalies. You can look at jet stream anomalies, precipitation anomalies. You can look at, anything else. But this, in our estimation, is probably the better way to look at the pattern. Anyway, so the dotted contour is the inactive phase of the MJO. This is the whole planet on one chart, but the Kelvin wave generation area is roughly right along in here. Okay, the dotted contours are the inactive phase of the MJO, and that's what we're seeing. And sure enough, this model is like that other model we saw. It's strong, or at least moderately strong, easterly anomalies. The blues are easterly anomalies, forecast for the dateline region for the next week or so, and they fade out. Notice the inactive phase of the MJO is still to be in control, but weak westerly anomalies or even neutral anomalies are forecast to sort of take hold. And then somehow the active phase, a weak active phase, tries to organize itself, we'll say, end of June, and holds into pretty much all of summer. You're into late August by this time. And again, this model has been consistently showing this buildup of westerly anomalies. We don't believe any of it anymore. We suspect this near-term pattern of weak anomalies is more likely the outcome, with the MJO being generally weak and not pushing strong one way or another, and anomalies not strong one way or the other. Now, the good, you go, oh, that's horrible, but you know what? We were in La Nina. We've been in La Nina all this past winter, and, if that's the worst that it is, that isn't too bad, considering this is a La Nina after a super El Nino. So we'll take it. Just kind of a weak, gutless kind of pattern. But, and the part is that doesn't feed the jet stream. That doesn't help promote storm development. Storm is generally weak, but, that's better than just having a full-bore La Nina and, just the things that it does to the jet stream, and it just basically enhances the inactive phase of the MJO. So we're not in that sort of a mode. Things could be much worse. Also, low-pass filter. Okay, let's take a look. So here, this dotted contour, I'll call it negative anomalies or dotted low-pass data, if you wanted that. This is basically La Nina. It shows La Nina fading out May 30th. Earlier runs had this thing dead by now, basically May 8th or so. Still, it's lingering on a little bit. That's no surprise. This is, You want to see this, the solid contour right here. This would be on the date line. But notice, and a couple of weeks ago, we actually saw that El Nino developing or forecast. It's gone from the charts now. If anything, La Nina looks like it's going to try to return a little bit. But there's your dotted contours. They're way off to the I'll call it the East Pacific, or maybe even the inland U.S. Actually, we can just go down here. Oh, you can't really tell this way. But yeah, so 120 California is like right here. So this is inland of the U.S. West Coast as we get into the early fall. That's kind of good. So that means basically a neutral pattern for the U.S. West Coast. All right, so we've talked about the MJO and its propensity or lack of potential to fuel the jet stream and support storm development. Let's go, and what we've seen is, not really La Nina anymore, but not El Nino, just kind of a neutral pattern, which is about what was expected. Let's take a look down in the ocean. There's some interesting things going on here. West Pacific here, East Pacific here. This is actual temperatures. These are the anchor lines on the TAO buoy array strung on the equator the whole way across the Pacific. No small engineering feat there at all. Relaying their data via satellite to central computers that then build these images for us. So real-time, semi-real-time. It's a 5-day average, but it still gives you an idea of what's going on subsurface. If we were in La Nina, you wouldn't see this sort of a pattern. We see warm water in the west, yes, but the 28-degree isotherm, since La Nina started, was hovering right around 180, 170. Look where it is now. It's over to 148 or so, 149, suggesting warm water is moving off to the east. That's kind of good. That suggests maybe a Kelvin wave. And we have had westerly anomalies associated with a tropical system, associated with the previous active phase of the MJO earlier part of, or the latter part of April. Suggests maybe a Kelvin wave is in flight. And we see the 24 degree isotherm working its way to the east, and actually some warm water there at the surface. So this is a much better picture. In fact, here, let's look at differences from normal for this time of year. Last week we had an area right here of 1 degree anomalies, cooler than normal water, and weeks before that it was down to 2 or 3 degrees below normal, kind of blocking the normal Kelvin wave path. And Kelvin wave is normal. So here's the deal. You get the active phase of the MJO. It blows westerly anomalies or westerly winds here, takes warm water that's here, pushes it down to depth, and forms like a bubble that works its way the whole way across under the ocean surface, and then finally erupts off of Peru and Ecuador. Well, we don't see anything blocking the Kelvin wave path right now. In fact, we see a pretty good open pipeline for warm water to move off to the east, suggesting that, well, if there isn't a Kelvin wave in flight, at least there's an open conduit for water to get through. We see warm water here, is that maybe 2 degree or so anomalies, but this is not attributed to a Kelvin wave. This is attributed to just slack trades off of Peru and Chile, and it's been there for a while, but actually pretty normal, homogenized setup here. This is good. Here's another version of the same chart, different, basically the same sort of data, but depicted differently. Here's the interesting part, 4 degree anomalies, one little pocket of 4 degree anomalies here. And also, here is that previous cool pocket. This one seems to run a bit behind the other chart. This, we think, is much less pronounced now, these cool anomalies. And this warm water appears to be starting to work its way to the east. And yet another view, upper ocean heat anomalies, upper 300 meters. Here's the West Pacific. Here's the East Pacific. Cooler than normal temperatures here in June of last year. September, that was La Nina. Now we move into this year. Warm water building in the west. Something that almost looks like a Kelvin wave. Notice warm water making its way over across the Pacific in March. And now it looks like a much more pronounced, right here, just these last little pixels here is the latest data, suggesting, in fact, another Kelvin wave in flight. This cool water here is the upwelling phase of the Kelvin wave cycle. So maybe a Kelvin wave is in fact in flight. And yet one more bit of data, sea level anomalies for May 8th. Here we go. Now this shows you strip away. This is, there we go, it's Mexico, Chile, Australia here, the equator right here. Of course, strip away all the waves, strip away the tides, strip away wind swell, everything. And these yellows are 0 to 5 centimeter anomalies. The ocean's just a little bit higher right here. And what that means is warm water at depth. Warm water down low expands, creates a little bubble on the surface. And so this was cut off right around at 160. Now all of a sudden there's this little finger of warm water, or indication of anomalies that warm water is moving east. Also, a little bit of warm water off of Chile, but nothing new pronounced. This suggests that also maybe something that almost resembles a Kelvin wave is in flight, moving its way off to the east. And all right, so we talked subsurface. Let's see what's going on at the surface. And there's good news here too. Now, these are temperature anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year. We saw a lot of upwelling the past 2 weeks along Peru here down into Chile. Blues were showing up. Now that's all gone, other than this little finger here. Warming is again occurring along Chile and Peru. A pretty intense warming here. This is better part of 2 to 3 degrees above normal along Ecuador, over the Galapagos, working their way out to about 110 west, and then still a generalized warming pattern west of there. Certainly no signs of La Nina. If anything, this looks like a weak but diffuse El Nino. The trend the past 7 days, and you can see it here as well, warming along Peru, especially off of Ecuador, the Galapagos, and out. And then still generalized warming there. Also this kind of general warming pattern from California on off to the Philippines. No real signs of cooling anywhere in the equatorial Pacific. Then, of course, the overview. You just sort of get a broad, and the thing that strikes you when you look at this is every place is warm, warmer than normal. We suspect that the climatology needs to be updated some. That is, there's been a steady pattern of the oceans getting warmer over the past 30, 40 years or so. And we're talking just a quarter of a degree, half a degree. But, we've just had La Nina. You would think that would have stomped down some of these temperatures, but no, we're seeing, and it's not just confined to the Pacific, it's in the Atlantic, it's in the Indian Ocean too. So, but even that, cut off a fraction of a degree off all this and try to get most of this into the neutral pattern, you still see pretty good warming here along Peru and out over the Galapagos. So definitely La Nina is gone, no signs of it anywhere. A warming trend is occurring. Whether it's El Nino, that's a different story. So we look at actual ocean temperatures, differences from normal for this time of year in the Niño 1.2 region. This is the area off of Ecuador and Peru out to the Galapagos. And of course, as expected, past 5-6 days, temperatures are going up, still 0.735 of a degree above normal. But this area is very noisy, and it does not tell you whether El Nino or La Nina is going on. It's just a region to monitor. It is this region, the Niño 3.4 region, which basically is on the equator, south of California, out to almost the date line. That's the official place you use for monitoring El Nino. It shows temperatures at 0.4 of a degree, or 0.43 above normal. Minimum El Nino threshold is half a degree for basically 9 months. We're not seeing that. We're seeing some temperatures working their way up here for 2 weeks was that above normal. But generally, all this is saying is normal temperatures are in control. La Nina's gone, but certainly no El Nino. Let's go take a look at the atmosphere real quick. The first thing we like to look at is the Southern Oscillation Index. Difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. Negative numbers like this suggest perhaps the active phase of the MJO. It was about a 14-15 day run here of negative numbers. Not super negative, but good enough to suggest, this probably was the active phase of the MJO, but we're moving out of that now. And all the data that we've seen suggests, the inactive phase is moving into the West Pacific. Current value, 4.92. The 30-day running average, look at that. It went pretty negative, minus 11.28. Certainly, so this daily index is very noisy. This smooths it out a little bit. You definitely see a trend towards the negative numbers, meaning the active phase of the MJO. But now today, it's at minus 9.96, so it's starting to rise, suggesting probably that the inactive phase of the MJO is moving in. The 90-day running average, you can kind of use this to get a sense of what's going on with El Nino, La Nina. It's down at minus 4.83. That's, not that far down. It needs to be down around minus 15 before you can start thinking about El Nino. So basically, it's saying things are neutral, they're normal, and all this suggests the active phase of the MJO is fading, moving towards the inactive phase. The other index we use is the ESPI index. It's like the Southern Oscillation Index, but instead of measuring the difference in pressure between these two areas, it's the difference in precipitation. This had been down for probably a month. We talked to NOAA. They got on it, and they're always great about doing this. They didn't realize they had a computer problem. They fixed it within a day. Boom, now we see our numbers. This had been hovering down around -1. Now it's at minus 0.29, meaning basically dead neutral. You want to see it be positive if you've got El Nino. That means you'll have more precipitation than normal in here. You kind of look and go, yeah, it's kind of a mix. It's just neutral. We wouldn't be surprised to see this go positive, but only maybe positive, 0.3 or 4, something like that. But what this means is La Nina is officially dead. It's gone. It's not in the ocean, clearly. It's not in the atmosphere anymore. It's not in the pressure indexes. So we're just dead neutral right now. So we're in recovery mode from La Nina. And then one last look. What's the forecast for Nino 3.4 temperatures? Well, they've certainly downgraded from what we saw a couple weeks ago when they were talking by this fall we'd be up at 1 degree above normal. Well, now a dose of reality. Where are we? May? Yeah. So temperatures per this were about half a degree above normal. That's about right. It's about 0.4 or so. The forecast is hovering around 0.3, and if nothing else, going down to maybe 0.1.5 above normal. So basically, ENSO neutral for the coming winter. And here's the actual, it's kind of small, but you can maybe see it. This temperature, sea surface temperature distribution now, of course. There's South America, U.S., Pacific West Coast, West Pacific over here, Australia. So June, yeah, like they're showing this sort of generalized warming pattern out towards the date line. Maybe getting a little bit more developed come October, November, which would sort of hint at some sort of maybe a minimal Modoki kind of El Nino, but not a lot of warming over here off of South America at all. So no El Nino, probably just basically ENSO neutral for the coming winter. So short term, no real swell on the way, maybe a tiny pulse of southern hemi swell, background swell for California next weekend some time frame. A hint of a stronger storm under New Zealand later in the work week. Maybe some swell to result, or it might all be a bunch of hype by the models. Long term, MJO moving from the active phase to the inactive phase, so probably not a whole lot of atmospheric support for storm development for the next couple of weeks. And then longer term, no El Nino in the forecast, but no La Nina either, just sort of a neutral pattern. And then we saw some models that suggested the PDO, that's even a longer term oscillation, 15 to 30 year oscillation, might be heading slightly negative by this winter. Not necessarily indicative of going to, back into the negative or the cool phase of the PDO, but not really suggesting that the warm phase is strongly in control either. It wouldn't be surprising to see it sort of dip off for a little bit for a year or so, and then we'll know where we're at. Again, typically you don't know whether you're in the warm or the cool phase of the PDO till you've been in it for about 5 years, so we still got a ways to go. Anyway, that's it for tonight. We'll do this again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.